and welcome to another one of our Farm Transition Workbook video series installments. In this installment, we're going to be talking about retirement planning and how retirement planning can actually be a very critical part of the overall farm transition planning process. And if you're looking for more resources on this issue, you can turn to your Farm Transition Workbook. These materials will be covered in Chapter 3. Now, lots of farmers and ranchers wonder why we even talk about retirement because, as we'll discuss in a few slides, there's some debate about whether or not the retired farmer or rancher actually exists. But in actuality, we really care about what someone's going to be doing with the latter portions of their career because it's integrally involved in how we go about forming our transition plan. And to illustrate that, we can take a little bit of a look at how someone's net worth changes over time. When we start out as a beginning farmer or rancher, we're probably in what we call the accumulation stage, where we're acquiring more assets and hopefully having positive growth in our net worth, but we're making lots of debt payments, we're trying to grow, and as a result there may not be a lot of spare cash flow left for investment. So our wealth accumulation tends to be relatively gradual. However, as that debt gets paid off, as we develop more assets that are income producing, those assets actually start to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and so our wealth accumulation starts to seriously increase. For lots of us, this may be occurring in the mature part of our professional life, maybe our 40s, 50s, perhaps even into our 60s. As we get into retirement, we've switched then from a wealth acquisition stage to a stage in which we're now consuming some of the wealth that we've accumulated because we may not be actively adding to it as much. We may be in a retirement mode. And in a retirement mode, we're not getting those professional monetary returns, so we're probably using a little bit of that resource. Now, this really starts to become important for the farm or ranch operations transition to the next generation, because if we don't have enough wealth to live off sustainably, we're going to consume pretty much all of that wealth just to maintain us while we're in our retirement years. And as a result, there's really not going to be much left to pass on to the next generation. If we've done a pretty good job of retirement planning, we may be able to consume only a slight portion of that amount, leaving a pretty significant amount to pass on to the next generation. Or if we've done incredibly well, and if we're managing our retirement lifestyle in such a manner that we're even able to live just off of the income that our assets are producing and not really have to dip into any of the principal, we might actually still be growing our wealth while we're in that spending stage. And then that leads us to the giving stage, wherein we decide, are we going to basically give everything away to someone else and zero out our personal wealth at our time of passing? Or if we want to leave that in some form of entity that can continue sustainably to throw off income, perhaps for generations. We may be talking about generational wealth in this circumstance. So all of this matters to farm transition planning because transition planning inherently involves passing along some of these assets to the next generation. And if in the spending stage we've consumed all of these assets, then really there's not much of a transition to talk about because there's really nothing to transition. That's why retirement planning is so important for our farmers and ranchers, because if they really do care about passing on something to the next generation, that retirement plan is going to define exactly how much there's going to be left and in turn what tools are going to be needed to transfer that on. That's not necessarily easy for us though in agriculture because our retirement assets and our business assets are almost inextricably intertwined, and those are then the assets that we tend to pass on to the next generation. Meaning that retirement planning has to be part of our transition plan because we just can't have a transition plan without it. The assets that are going to sustain us in our retirement span are going to be the assets that are going to have to be used by the business to successfully maintain it for the next generation. So that's why this is so hugely important. We really just cannot have a transition plan without retirement planning. Now, lots of people say, well, I'm a farmer, I'm never going to retire. And I understand that people want to be involved actively with farming and as long as they live in many cases. But we also can't escape the fact that we can't maintain the level of activity that we always have. Physically, we just can't sustain it. And so in one form or another, our involvement with the farming operation is going to change. And if we start to look at that as a form of retirement, we can actually be very proactive about it because our retirement plan is going to feed into our enterprise mix, which feeds into our human resource needs, which feeds into our transition plan. And to elaborate on that, if we know what level of involvement we can have with the operation and how much we're going to be able to actively contribute to its wealth accumulation, We also need to understand how much we're going to be able to withdraw from the business to support our retirement income and our lifestyle. Knowing what that budget looks like, what we're going to be able to contribute, and what we're going to need to withdraw, then defines the kinds of enterprises that we're going to need to sustain not only our withdrawal needs, but also the withdrawal needs of whoever is working on the operation, perhaps assuming a greater role in its operation or responsibility. Knowing which enterprises that we're going to need to sustain the families involved then goes on to define what we're going to need in terms of human resources. Who can we bring on? Who's going to be changing their roles? Who might be phasing out? And all of that feeds into our transition plan and telling us what we need in terms of both resources and people to make this plan actually take place. As we talk about this, then we see that our retirement plan is clearly an integrated part of our transition plan. We need it because we need to understand who's going to be contributing what, who's going to be withdrawing what, and then that in turn defines how all the rest of the pieces of our transition plan can actually come into place. What enterprises we'll need to develop, what enterprises we'll need to sustain, what enterprises we might need to let go, who needs to be brought in, who can be kept in the operation, and who might be actually reducing their roles of involvement with the farm or ranch. To achieve all this stuff, we need to have a vision, and we need to have a very clearly defined and achievable business plan to help us figure out how we're going to have a business large enough to support all the needs that we're going to be placing on it. And at the same time, as we see that some members of the family may be reducing their level of involvement and others might be increasing it, we need to understand exactly how many captains we're going to have on the bridge of this ship. Lots of farmers don't like to retire, and they certainly don't like to give up control of their operations, which is completely understandable. But for the other members of this operation to grow into the roles that they'll need to be able to maintain as part of a successful transition plan, they need to have room to operate, and that might include room without someone looking over their shoulder. So these are all important questions that our retirement plan can really help answer for us. Now, as we talk about retirement, and again, sometimes for farmers and ranchers, retirement is a really dirty word. What we're basically talking about is how would you like to spend the latter part of your professional life? And having a plan is really important to that because it's essential for us to have security and happiness. When we talk about security, what we're talking about is knowing that we're going to have the financial means to deal with any uncertain circumstances that are out there, whether it's unforeseen medical expenses or perhaps an unforeseen opportunity or perhaps the loss of a loved one. Are we going to have what we need to be able to adapt to those circumstances? And implicit in all that is the fact that we've got enough to maintain a reasonable lifestyle to sustain us for as long as we live. That's the security side of things. When we talk about happiness, we really want to talk about creating a professional farm and ranch environment in which you can enjoy what you've worked a lifetime to achieve. Lots of farmers and ranchers feel like they always need to be continually growing their operation, and I see many times they don't take the time to really, relish in what they have already accomplished. And so with a good retirement plan, we can find a way for farmers and ranchers to still maintain a fulfilling, rewarding level of professional involvement with their operation, but at the same time, give them the time and the resources to appreciate and enjoy the work that they've already put into the operation. What we're talking about here is really moving from professional success to personal significance, giving you the time to translate your professional success into meaningful personal fulfillment, which may sound a little warm and fuzzy, and yeah, that's probably true, but that's also what most folks work their lifetime to achieve, and so a good retirement plan really can help us achieve that. If we've talked about retirement too much already for you, we understand because lots of farmers and ranchers have questions about what retirement looks like for them. In the first place, they feel like they've just now got their operation to a condition in which they're comfortable with it, so why would they want to walk away from it? And again, I think there's a misunderstanding between farmers and ranchers and financial professionals. When we say retirement, we don't mean you have to walk away from your farm. Rather, what we're talking about is some sort of a change in your level of day-to-day professional involvement with the operation. Maybe you're really moving from a position of being a day-to-day manager to being a chairman of the board, so to speak, meaning that you still get to participate in some of the big strategic decisions, but you don't have to worry about the day-to-day operations so much because those have passed on to someone else. Obviously, farmers and ranchers have an emotional connection to their farm, and we certainly don't want to overlook that either. As a matter of fact, we've got to take great care when we're establishing our retirement plans and our transition plans because we want to make sure, again, that there is a meaningful and rewarding role for that founding generation to continue to play in the farm operation. If we basically just say, hey, thanks for all the work that you put in accumulating this farmer ranch business, but now go away. We're going to handle it from here. Just take your retirement check and be happy, go fish. That's not good for those founding generation members either. So we need to respect that there's an emotional connection to the farmer ranch and make sure that the farmer has an emotionally satisfying way of staying connected to it. That then leads to what we do in retirement. Most of the time the right answer is probably not just go sit on the porch and drink lemonade, although we certainly want the retiring founding generation to have that option if they want it, but we want them to have, again, something important that they can contribute to the operation and still maintain that very important emotional connection. Perhaps the most base and fundamental question that most people have, and the reason that they don't even really consider retirement, is that they just don't have the confidence that there's going to be enough money for them to retire. And most of the time, I think if our farmers and ranchers took a look at the assets that they've accumulated, they might find that there actually is a viable pathway to retirement for them, and they don't have to necessarily be as concerned about having enough money for their day-to-day expenses. But it does take having a plan. And so how can we plan for retirement? What's it going to take in terms of resources and in terms of income? And how do we get there from where we're at? Remember when we talked about this earlier in the video series, it's absolutely vital that you have to have an understanding of where your operation is right now to understand if it's possible for you to get to a place in your operations lifespan where you could feel comfortable going into some form of retirement. What kind of contributions is retirement going to take from the farm? In other words, what kind of income is the farm going to have to produce to enable us to take retirement? And what are the implications for that in terms of the enterprise mix and in terms of the human resources that are going to be needed for us to maintain that level of spin-off income for the founding generation? There are lots of other considerations out there, but perhaps the most important one is to remember that if we don't plan for what we're going to do later in our professional life, we're probably going to be a big draw in terms of the cash flow for the farm or ranch business, and there may not be enough cash flow for us to do that and still have a viable farm business to pass on to that next generation. So how do we create this plan? It's really not as hard as you might think. We just need to sit down and do some business planning, which we've talked about elsewhere in this video series and in the workshop as well. The first thing we need to do is talk about our retirement lifestyle. What's that going to look like compared to the current lifestyle that we have? And one of the most important ways to figure that out is to simply gather data about our current non-farm spending. We need to separate our personal spending from the farm spending and say, what are we spending on housing, groceries, utilities, healthcare, transportation, all those sorts of things that may be personal to us but not necessarily integrally part of the farm or ranch business. It'll probably take quite a bit of data there, probably going back at least several months, if not maybe a couple of years, to determine what our actual personal budget tends to look like. Once we've got that, then we can go about establishing some goals about how we want to live in retirement. Then that in turn will help us define what our income needs will be. How much money are we going to have from the assets that we've accumulated to maintain that kind of lifestyle that we've got. Then we can identify some timelines. If we know that retirement is 5, 10, 15, 20 years away, we can start to define exactly what we need to do in order to achieve the cash flow goals that we need to have for that retirement income to be supported. After we've done all this, now we can build a spending and investing plan. We can estimate what our investment returns might be, again, taking into account some of the various risk profiles that we want to have to get the kind of asset growth that we'll need to achieve in order to reach those financial goals that we talked about. And Dr. Jones is going to talk about those investment returns in another video that we'll have in this series. We also need to talk about factoring in taxes or potential changes in income. What would the investment landscape look like if interest rates took a sharp increase or decrease? If we've got lots of our assets tied up in farm land, what would happen if land values were to suddenly appreciate or depreciate? As we get close to retirement, the other thing that we're going to need to think about is how do we change our investment portfolio? We might need to have a move from slightly riskier but higher returning assets such as the stock market in towards things that are a little bit more stable but also generate perhaps smaller returns like savings, bonds, and the like. So these are all kind of high-level things for us to be thinking about as we form our retirement plan. But Dr. Jones in another video in this series is going to talk specifically about how do we go to create our retirement plan in terms of savings goals, estimating our income needs, and looking at an investment mix that's right for us. To find that video and more resources about all of the issues that we've talked about today, or for just more information about the transition process in general, you can go to our transitions website. That's agecon.okstate.edu/farm transitions. Again, that's agecon.okstate.edu/farm transitions. And we thank you for watching.